from Pororua, let's say, into Wellington, or travelling in on the motorways through Auckland. Now, interesting thing well, you can see that it's dropped right off by the growth, the negative growth. It's about 0.7, I think, 0.8%. So it's actually shrinking in Wellington. In Auckland, it's shrunk by about 0.2. Be interesting to see what happens next year, of course, when the data comes out. It comes out quite quickly, because not only has that 75 odd been sustained for quite a while, but it's gone up even higher, as we all know. So it does have an effect, but it takes time to work through, and it's not as dramatic as we think. This is quite interesting. This is rural. So what caused that?
Price of dairy went up, they thought butter went up.
Things were bad in the dairy industry in that year. Went up again. Look at it now. It's very hard to know what that means, because it's people travelling through as well. So this could have been, there's a lot less people going out to Coromandel that year from Auckland. Could mean that. So it's very hard to interpret that data. But these are easier to get your head around. But you can see that there is an effect, although it doesn't look like, if you live in a city, I'm not sure if we all live in a city, but I live in Auckland, obviously, and it did have an effect, Wellington even more so. But now that's the first order effect. That's people responding to the price. Now, let's just look at this. That's transport. This is your average household spending over all of New Zealand, 2003, 2004. It's pretty much the same as the previous one, which was 2001, 2002. Unfortunately, the new data for 5 and 6 hasn't come out yet. They're a bit behind the times. They'll be out next month, so I'll be able to look at it. But this is how people spend their money on average. Transport, 16% of their household budget spent on transport. Housing, that's your mortgage and things like that, 24% is pretty high. Food, 16%. Housing operation, 13%. That's things like electricity and maintaining your house, paying your rates, that kind of stuff, and so on. I'm just going to talk at the moment about transport. We'll come back to talking about housing a bit later. Here's transport. So you see, within transport, you can break it down further. Fuel is only 4.2% of the household budget. What is it? It's small. It's not a big thing. So obviously people don't respond. The previous period, it was 3.8%. So you see it's edging up, and it'll be interesting to see what it is in 2005, 2006 data, when that comes out.
It's going to feed through to food. It's already doing that.
I beg your pardon?
It's going to feed through to food.
Food too, probably, yes. But we're going to see a reordering. This part will jump, but of course this part also affects other components, like you say food, for instance, because it's a cost element in bringing the food to you and in producing the food out in the fields.
It's not that, it's the biofuels that have a big effect already.
Well, there's another. We'll come to that in a minute. Yep, you're quite right. Other things just to look at. This is an interesting one here. This is the Kiwi propensity for OEs. 3.5% of the budget goes on overseas travel. Isn't that remarkable? Now, when that comes under strain, people are going to go overseas less often, perhaps, or the trips are going to drop off, or the time between the trips is going to get longer. And we're told all the time that the first thing that's going to take strain is going to be discretionary air travel. So flips over to the Pacific Islands, popping over to Melbourne for shopping, less of that. Now, but the thing is, as the price keeps going, what could you actually do? This is a breakdown of how your travel goes, because you are going to have to change as the price continues going up. Now, your hardest one to change is getting to work. 26% by kilometres travelled is going to work. That's your commute. That is going to be difficult to change. You either might go by bus or whatever, or you might change your job or your home location to reduce that. Your more likely thing to do to reduce will be that, which would be it's.
Mothers taking their children to ballet and things, social recreation.
There's personal. Well, it depends. You see, a lot of people do trip chaining. So you go to work and you drive past the school, drop the kiddies off and carry on, and that'll fall into there. But there's personal over there. There's education, only going to like university or something, I guess. Shopping's quite a biggie. I mean, all of these things might have an effect, and we could spend a lot of time on that. Say shopping, for instance. Now, you might, instead of going down to the dairy every day, you might do your shopping twice a month, 3 times a month instead, to reduce that. which will favour the big box retailer. It'll squeeze the dairy. So you're going to look at job losses in the dairies. You're going to look at more emphasis on the big box retailers until their cost drivers come through, because they depend upon trucks bringing stuff to them in a big way. So can't tell you, don't know what the answer is to that. But just looking at these two biggies, because you've got to really go the 80-20 rule and look at what are the things that you can actually get your head around. Now, supposing you did this and you reduced your weekend trips or the distance you travel to your weekend hideaways, you might, instead of going every month, you might go every second month, or you might go somewhere a bit closer. So instead of going to Ruapehu, you might go instead to Kowhai Bay. You know, there'll be decisions that you'll make which will affect that. And of course, the effect of that is it'll have an impact on tourism, local tourism. So there may be job losses in local tourism and some of the more remote areas. Of course, you have got this option, PT, carpooling and so forth, and as time goes by, that's the second component where it'll start to come in. But now prices will continue to rise. World oil price will continue to rise. Government's bringing in carbon trading that'll add at least 10% to the cost of fuel. It might be higher. It depends on how that system actually comes to bear. And if you're living in Auckland, you can be bringing in a regional fuel tax, which will be to pay for the electrification of the railway, reduce carbon emissions, and so forth. So more and more costs are coming in there. And as you switch your spending out of fuel, you're going to have to cut back on other consumer areas. So there's going to be falling production in those areas, and that will be followed by falling employment. Okay, and we'll look at what sort of employment. The key here, though, is that unemployment cuts your petrol demand much quicker than the price. The elasticity there is 1.28. Now, household employment. So one person in the house might be out of work, so that will reduce your travel by a half. Okay? Or you might have to work half a week, 3 days a week instead of 5 days a week. Those are the kind of things that might happen. So in other words, a 50% drop in household income will mean a 64% drop in the fuel that you consume. Some other research. This was coming out of a chap called Michelini, who used to be at Waikato University. He took the data and looked at the elasticity with regard to income. And it's quite interesting to see how that goes. The highest of that, well, there's a group here called services, general services, 1.32. Transport I've just referred to already, 1.28. The lowest is food. The lowest elasticity is food. So you can be out of work, or your income, let's say your wages have been cut by $100, you'll spend $56 less on food. Whereas here, your income is cut by $100, $100 less, $56 less spending. $100 less income, $128 less spending. Services, for $100 less income, you'll spend $132 less on services. Now, this is a whole baggage of things, but on the North Shore, most of the economy there is based on services. It might be hairdressers, it might be masseurs, it might be all sorts of things like that. Those guys are going to get less income from you. Your economy of the city is going to be impacted. So looking at the likely